I love World of Warcraft. I've been playing this game since Cataclysm and criticize the current state all you want, but the more I grew up, I've always found myself coming back to WoW. It's like an addictive drug I take every once in a while so I can prevent myself from going insane. This is my cocaine, and I can't help but love it. Yet I will agree with the modern player base that WoW has been on a downward spiral as of late, both in gameplay and in story. But let's go over that key part, the story. Today in this video, I'm going to go over the storytelling and the lore of World of Warcraft because while in every single video I make I don't talk about a video game story, WoW is an exception because it has very interesting lore, a lore that as the current use come and go has slowly started to become uninteresting and meddle with already established points that don't make any sense. Let me start off by saying this, I'm not going over the game itself. Nowadays the game is mediocre or bad to the point that it's basically become a job at this point, and this is also my opinion. Say what you want about the current state, but I won't be going over the game as I am the storytelling and why it feels so stale and uninteresting. Let it be known, I am not a major lore nerd who gathers info throughout all bits of WoW media, but I think I have a consistent understanding of the lore of yesteryears and why some of the new lore they added in does make sense. So whatever I'm saying might be coming out of my ass. I mean, what am I? The red shirt guy? Let's begin. We are now entering Phase 1. One of the things that's always irked me about modern WoW is its writing and storytelling and how uninteresting it's gotten over the years. Warcraft's writing as a whole was never great in a literary sense, but it was all simple, fun, and had an over-the-top charm that made it stand out from other fantasy media. It presented itself as the fantasy WrestleMania with big loaded sequences that made you go, wow! Oh my god, that is so fucking cool! All while disguising a relatively mediocre plot. It was all style and had some good substance, yet at the end of the day, it was all still fun, entertaining, and was treated as something you should enjoy, not take seriously. Yet as the years went on, new writers came along, and after seeing the praise towards Final Fantasy XIV's story, especially the Shadowbringers expansion, they decided, hey, we can make a serious story, you know, and so now they write the game as if it's Last of Us tier level writing, effectively removing the style that made WoW so special and thus making the game look like a joke. Of course, there are some good moments in WoW's modern history, but what made WoW so special in the first place is lost, now replaced with contrivances and a hollow story arc featuring the worst villain in WoW's current history. They've effectively made WoW less like fantasy WrestleMania and more saccharine. By limiting the style, you're left with half-baked substance that all it does is makes me disinterested and doze off at some points. Remember when I said in my top 10 favorite games video that Blizzard stopped trying with their story after Mists of Pandaria? Do you know why I said that? Because Mists of Pandaria, in my opinion, has probably some of the best storytelling I've seen in WoW, and gameplay-wise, it was WoW's last good expansion. It's not perfect, but it was definitely better than what we have now. It expanded so much of WoW's lore we never seen before. You got to go to the continent of Pandaria, home of the Pandaren, a race that has been treated as a joke since Warcraft 3. You got to learn about the Pandaren, their history, and their culture, which even though it's a carbon copy of China, it's still really cool. You got the chance to explore Pandaria at your own pace without the worry of an overarching threat. This gave the expansion a free and explorable vibe to it. You were simply discovering all of Pandaria and not fighting some evil threat, which not a lot of modern expansions have. You were simply bringing the war in Warcraft to Pandaria and discovering a never-before-seen landmass. You got to free and reunite the Calaxy Paragon. You got to witness Tauren birth. I mean, name another game that allows you to witness birth from a cow. All of this without any boring, poorly animated in-engine cutscenes every 10 minutes like we have now. The expansion story also has a really interesting message about why people fight, with all the negative emotions you face throughout the expansion coming back to remind you in the end. It put the player first and foremost and made the player an integral part of the story. And it pulled it off so well with well-told stories that not only introduce you further into the culture of Pandaria, but also naturally progresses the story in a natural, cohesive way. MOP was a good expansion, both in gameplay and story. It had style, great substance, and made the player a part of the World of Warcraft in such a unique way. Oh yeah, and it also had the whole subplot with Garrosh, and there's no good of a transition than that. Garrosh Hellscream represents the beginning of the end of WoW storytelling. Garrosh invaded Pandaria for two reasons: to save his people from starving in a desert, and to take Pandaria's legendary artifacts, including the Divine Bell, said to give warriors unlimited power, and he wants to use them against the Alliance. Notice how I said, his people? and not the Horde. No Tauren, no Trolls, no Giddy Elves, no Yif and Fox people, none of that. This is his Horde. The barbaric orc warriors from Draenor that enjoyed the thirst of war and conquest in the legends of his father. Garrosh's goal, I think since Wrath, was to live up to the legends of his father told by Thrall and Outland and make the Horde more stronger than it ever was by using some brilliant yet questionable strategies that only an orc from Draenor would achieve. Garrosh was a good villain. He was entertaining, his motivation made sense, and it all tied organically with all he did in previous expansions. All Garrosh wanted was to make a stronger, more legendary horde unfettered by peace-loving animal people and disease-walking body bags, and succeed he did. He made the horde stronger than it ever was. He made the horde more orcish than it ever was. He wanted honor, and he got it. But it wouldn't last long, of course, and it was only until after that he would give us a blast from the past.
We will never be slaves!
Warlords of Draenor was so disappointing on all fronts. From the lack of things to do, the poor implementations of garrisons, and the absence of stuff that could have been, WoD would have been a good or even solid expansion if they delayed it and did some tweaking, but we will roll with the cards we are given. WoD represents the point where World of Warcraft jumps the shark, a point of no return from which the quality of the game never recovered. WoD wasn't a good expansion, but at least they knew how to continue the story in a much weird way. So the story of WoD goes that after the events of Siege of Orgrimmar, Garrosh escapes his Pandaren prison thanks to the help of a bronze dragon named Kairos Dormu, and so with a few of his remaining SOG subordinates escapes to an alternate version of Draenor, before it became what we now know as Outland. There, he meets up with his father, one Warlord Grommash Hellscream, and so he alters history by telling him not to drink Manaroth's blood that made all orcs corrupted and invade Azeroth in the first place, choosing instead to imprison Gul'dan and uniting the orc clans under the Iron Horde, a much more powerful horde built on steel and fire. And so under Grom's leadership, they set out to invade Azeroth once again and repeat history all over again. With the help of the Archmage Khadgar, who is present on Outland, it's up to us to go back to the past and stop the Iron Horde from repeating history. Let that all sink in. Ready? Great. Lore-wise, as a whole, WoD was solid. I'm not gonna lie, it was really cool to go back in time to when Draenor wasn't in space and see the inhabitants of the savage world and how it all influenced Outland. Of course plant people, of course Roman Ogre Empire, of course cat monsters, and of course skinny Arakoa. Yet the storytelling left something to be desired. It still had player integration and was probably the last expansion to do so good. The player in these expansions was always an integral aspect of the story, helping the characters in their problems and progressing the plot further in a natural and cohesive way, compared to nowadays where the player only exists as a transitional plot device to let the important characters do the dirty work. And here, especially in the legendary questline, the player has almost no control over the story and so lets the characters do the dirty work. This is a trend that still continues to this day. This is also the point where WoW storytelling started to rely on contrivances that make things a bit confusing. In fact, WoD's whole premise is practically contrived, but they are less apparent in this expansion as they are in later ones. As I said before, Garrosh's goal was to make the Horde as strong as it was in the stories portrayed by Thrall, and take out the Alliance and claim resources for Orgrimmar. So why the hell did he decide to go back to Draenor and repeat history all over again? Or how did the Legion make contact with an alternate universe Gul'dan? But overall, the expansion story was fine, yet forgettable, and it was still interesting to see more of Draenor before it became Outland. This expansion was also when Senior VP of Story Development Chris Metzen would leave Blizzard and retire. This I can also attribute to the disinterest in WoW storytelling. Metzen was Blizzard's Shigeru Miyamoto and has been there for a long time. He's been watching over the lore, making sure it was all consistent and always making unsolved mysteries from Warcraft's history into full expansions and expanding on them even further with cool bits of lore that tied in organically with previous games. WoD was almost like his last goodbye to WoW. A goodbye that fell down a cliff and was slowly unable to recover. Metzen knew WoW to the core, and it would only be until he left where things would slowly be turning sour.
The Burning Legion has returned.
Legion was a step up from WoD, yet it still carried over some of the problems from WoD. It was solid enough in WoW's current, more darker age. It's the Burning Legion Invasion expansion we've been waiting for. Alternate Universe Gul'dan from Draenor has come to Azeroth and has brought with him the Burning Legion, one of Warcraft's greatest and strongest threats ever. The whole world is now in chaos, and the Horde and Alliance put aside their differences and team up to take down this demonic threat, all while they bring together the mightiest weapons of Azeroth to oppose this threat, including the likes of the Ashbringer, the Doomhammer, and the Pillars of Creation. Right from the word go, Legion pulls some heavy punches with its story, starting it all off with the return of Illidan's Stormrage after 4 expansions of imprisonment, and the demise of 2 valiant leaders, Vol'jin and Varian Wrynn, passing the reins of leadership over to Sylvanas Windrunner and Anduin Wrynn. This time you got to explore the Broken Isles. This time they introduced new settlements of the Elves, the fabled city of Suramar, which was said to be destroyed and inhabited by undead, new lore on the Vrykul, you got to face the Emerald Nightmare after so long, and you got to meet a brand new offshoot of Moose Torn called the High Mountain, of which their history stretches back to the War of the Ancients novel. Legion also marks the beginning of Sylvanas' story, where she attempts to control the Valkyrie in Stormheim for some reason, only to be foiled by Gen Greymane. Keep her in mind because she will become important later on. Following the death of Varian, we would see Anduin take his biggest step yet. Even though I never played through his questline, Prince Anduin Wrynn would take his biggest step in this expansion, learning of the fate of his father and becoming the next hero of the Alliance. If you did play the Alliance, you got to see Anduin Wrynn grow from a peace-loving priest boy to a proud, honorable king willing to lend a hand. This is absolutely phenomenal and makes the scene work so well. A great arc with a great end. Legion is also probably the last case of player integration in the game's story. I mentioned WoD was the last, but I think I might have lied there. You got to wield the most legendary artifact weapons ever from WoW's lore, including the one and only Ashbringer, and you used all of these to push back the Burning Legion, one of Warcraft's greatest and most talked about threats. In a way, this kinda makes Legion the WoW series finale, you fighting an endless army of demons to save your world from total annihilation. Bad ass. The expansion also suffered from wasted potential, particularly with the Emerald Nightmare and Argus. It was cool to visit these locations, yet I think they should have been done so much more, especially Argus, which should have been the full setting of Legion because there are so many things unexplored of the planet, like the Mount Caranos and the various forests and deserts and maybe even some Titan artifacts. Otherwise, the stories in these zones were pretty good overall. My favorite zones in the whole expansion were High Mountain and Argus. High Mountain because the Tauren are one of my favorite races in the game, and the zone had a really heartful story and a beautiful night skybox. Argus is my least favorite out of my 2 favorites because of how painful each zone was to navigate, but at least we got Makari, which is a beautiful look at what Argus once was. Too bad it was wasted for one patch. The whole story of Illidan's past is pretty disinteresting in this expansion since it repeats bits of Illidan's past that was explained in the War of the Ancients novel with small bits of context, but near the end it has a cool message in fantasy media that there can't be a chosen one and only you can choose your destiny the way you want it. Yet it also begs the question of why the hell did the Light choose Illidan to be their chosen one? Why not somebody else like, I don't know, Velen? Legion story-wise was pretty solid, and as I said before, it felt like the true series finale to World of Warcraft, us banishing the Titan Star Garrosh and putting an end to the Burning Crusade. It was filled with limited contrivances, but was overall pretty solid and brought lore over from books and novels, though that also begs the question whether or not the High Mountain of the Broken Isles are related to the High Mountain Tauren of the Legends books, which existed around Wrath of the Lich King. If WoD was the point where WoW jumped the shark, then Legion was the calm before the shitstorm that would come after. Battle for Azeroth was really bad. It was the point where I discovered that WoW started feeling less like a game and more like a chore. It was painfully grindy with so many daily and weekly quests that made me kinda miss Warlords of Draenor if I'm being honest. You also had the Azerite's Heart shit with Magni, island expeditions, and warfronts which were so boring and easy, and allied races, which was probably my favorite part of BFA as a whole, and heritage armor for both allied and some of the normal races. All this made the expansion feel cluttered with so many activities that you can't focus on one at a time. The warfronts were easy to do to the point that you would do nothing just to win, and the island expeditions were okay. You may recall that I have kept on saying how the story from previous expansions were solid and sometimes forgettable at best. BFA's entire story is where I found out just how low the lore has gone and made me miss Metzen. wasted potential, contrivances, and the rising of a terrible, terrible villain. Not only did the game have so much shit to do, but the story also had a lot more shit going on. Battle for Azeroth as a whole feels like it's failing to decide which one of two expansions it wants to be. Either an expansion about the conflict between the Alliance and Horde, or the long-awaited South Seas Old God expansion we've been waiting for. All of this put together made the expansion story an incoherent mess. One minute you can be fighting the war, then fighting the old gods, and then saving Azeroth, then fighting the war again, then the old gods again, then saving Azeroth again, then fighting Mechanomes, and then fighting the Naga, and then fighting Sylvanas, and then finally fighting the old gods again. This isn't a story as much as it is a poorly put together fanfiction that exists only for the sake of fan service without any organic progression. Everything that happens in this expansion is arbitrary, and that's the best word I could describe the story as a whole. It's utterly arbitrary with no natural flow or progression. It all exists for the sake of half-baked and disappointing fan service. Fan service won't save your life unless you somehow make it work within the confines of the story. Even Legion made its fan service work within its narrative. So now the Horde and Alliance are at each other's throats in hopes of a mineral resource called azurite, the blood of the planet Azeroth, which is bleeding all over from open wounds. So now it's up to you, the player, to win the war, save Azeroth by healing her wounds, recruit new allies in the Zandalari and the Kultiran humans, and uncovering a conspiracy behind Sylvanas' schemes. Right off the bat, this all sounds like it would have been the South Seas expansion we've been waiting for. Going to Zandalar was amazing. Probably my favorite lore zone implementation in a while. The trolls have such a fascinating history, so it was incredible to finally see the Golden Kingdom of Zandalar and the inhabitants of it like the Vulpera, which we don't really learn a single thing about. I'll admit that this was also kinda disappointing. We didn't get to fight the Zandalari, which I've always wanted to since Mists of Pandaria, so this recruitment came off as cheap. Would they even trust the Outsiders anymore? Did the events of Throne of Thunder matter? Are they still mad about that? There's even a joke made by the Zandalari about this discrepancy. Zandalar was still cool to see and introduced the blood trolls of Nazmir and the Vulpera and Sethrak. The Vulpera I didn't like not because I'm a furry, but because of how underdeveloped they are. We don't learn a single thing about them, like how did they come into being? Are they descended from some fox god? Or are they a creation of the Titans? The Kultira story, on the other hand, was much more well handled than the Zandalari, in my opinion. The Kultirans damn well remember the events of Warcraft 3 and are almost unforgiving towards Jaina Proudmoore when she first arrives. And after doing some tasks in the kingdom, they finally forgive her and rejoin the Alliance. Kultiras also introduced us to the haunted land of Drustvar, former home of the barbaric Drust, which have a very unique Wendigo aesthetic to it all. It also brought over the Tortolan from Hearthstone into the World of Warcraft, which is actually really fucking cool. I do hope they added more stuff from Hearthstone like the Gadgetzan shit, because even though Hearthstone is mostly not canon, the stuff they have in that game is way more interesting than what they give us in the actual World of Warcraft. The whole Azerite story with Magni was so boring and it went nowhere with no good resolution. We didn't even save Azeroth. That sword is still there, by the way. Starfang's whole story arc to take out Sylvanas was probably the best part of all BFA's story. We got to see him grow a bit into the Horde's unofficial hero and take down— oh, never mind. Actually, wait a minute, wasn't it Starfang's idea to burn down Teldrassil? I read from videos by Lily Orchard, and say what you want about him, but he mentions that it was Starfang's idea to burn down Teldrassil and kill the Night Elves. So why did he regret doing it anyway? Why didn't he have second thoughts before even invading Teldrassil? I'm starting to realize now that Starfang's whole story arc does not make sense. I'm afraid I'm gonna have to take that back. But hey, those cinematics are pretty good, I'll say that much. If you at least remove the context. Speaking of which, Sylvanas Windrunner as a whole made me realize just how fucking awful WoW's writing truly is and how contrived they do with their storytelling. Sylvanas in just one expansion alone had transitioned from a huntress in search of a way out of death to a perennial Mary Sue that wins at everything and is treated with enough respect and power that nobody can even get a dent on her. Except Saurfang, of course. She's basically a shitty version of Garrosh Hellscream. At least Garrosh had a good motivation and a story tied in organically with previous expansions, and it was only evil for like half an expansion. It was only in Warlords of Draenor that he went down on a whimper. Sylvanas did nothing during the events of Mists or Wad and was only called into action because it was all her doing behind the scenes. That's motherfucking Disney villain style writing! It's so bad and makes her more of a weak ass villain. It's so utterly contrived and it doesn't make sense. I should also mention Mechagon, which was a great zone, finally giving us gnome content after so many years. And then we have Queen Ashara and the Old Gods. The crusty shit around the anus that is this expansion story. They did Azshara and Azeroth so dirty in this expansion. So during the expansion, the Voidblade from Legion gets involved and thus comes face to face with the one and only N'Zoth, an old god we've been waiting to face for so many years since he was mentioned. The last known old god located on Azeroth and behind many of the lore's famous events, from the corruption of the Emerald Dream to turning Queen Azshara and her people into the Naga. What did they do? They gave both of them 2 patches and called it a day. We've waited several long years to see these two in the game, and the best they gave us were 2 patches? What the hell were they thinking? They did Azshara dirty, but N'Zoth had it worse. N'Zoth is a AAA world-destructful threat imprisoned in a city of walking horrors capable of corrupting the very world we walk on. And this is the best thing come up with? Grindy dailies in a raid with already existing races and tier gear? If Metzen was still on the team when this happened, he would have given N'Zoth his own expansion and made Azshara an antagonist with him. We've waited so long for this, and this is what they come up with. I mean, wow. Someone needs to be... In my opinion, it would have been a wise decision to make N'Zoth the full antagonist, with the Horde Alliance needing the allies in order to take him down. No Saurfang story, no Sylvanas story, Rastakhan would still die, but only by old god hands, and it would make the story less messy and more coherent. There was also the Heritage armor, which was kinda a missed bag. If you want to know my ranking on each of them, here you go. Some of the stories I've experienced with these Heritage armor sets were so underwhelming, like the Goblin set is the worst defender by far and is one of the worst looking Heritage sets I've seen. You know, something like this would have been infinitely better than what we have now, since the Goblin player's goal from the beginning was to become the next trade prince and overthrow Gallywix. There was also the Worgen Heritage quest that was also underwhelming. Why couldn't we just reclaim Gilneas for the armor? Nobody except role players touches that city anymore. Oh yeah, there's also Bwansamdi, the Troll Death Loa. He was the best character in the expansion personality-wise, and is basically the Facilier of the WoW universe. And that's about it. BFA was terrible, both in gameplay and story, but lore-wise, it did a solid job of expanding 2 islands that we've been waiting to explore for so long. This expansion, however, would mark the beginning of WoW's disinteresting to me, as the next expansion would cast a shadow that would shatter my veil of interest. So now we've come to modern day, the expansion that made me want to make this video in the first place, and the expansion with the most contrived and boring story, Shadowlands. Shadowlands as an expansion so far does not do BFA justice. The Covenant activities are forgettable, but at least they didn't add too much like BFA. They brought longer cooldowns to some of the spells in the expansion, effectively making combat slow for some classes. Torghast is grindy, repetitive, and not fun, and the story is balls to the wall bad, and the new lore they added doesn't help. Shadowlands by far has made me the most disinterested in WoW lore because of how uninspired it all feels. With BFA, they were able to expand upon 2 islands that we've been waiting to explore for so long and give the spotlight to fleshed out races that don't get enough spotlight treatment like trolls, gnomes, and goblins. And the Heritage armor quests were a great way to continue or introduce new stories of their respective races that harken back to their roots. With Shadowlands, here there are basically no connections to harken back to except for Ardenweald and the Jailer, and so they mostly feel uninspired and at best generic. Not to mention that some of the zones don't even look appealing, especially Bastion and Maldraxxus, which architecture-wise I like the Egyptian motif for the Necrolords, but the green fog makes the zone look heinous and the character designs look like shit, if I'm being honest. Actually, that line completely belongs to the Angels of Bastion. Completely uninspired and looks straight out of a Chinese mobile game. Don't even get me started on Bastion. That zone looks so generic, I would have guessed it was from a mobile game. Ardenweald reminds me of the game Ori and the Blind Forest, and it works as an opposite of the Emerald Dream and answers the classic question of where do the animals go when they die, which I think before it was said they go to the Emerald Dream, but whatever, I'll let it slide. Actually, before Ardenweald, animals, specifically animal gods, when they die, did go to the Emerald Dream, as in the Emerald Member raid at the very end, you can see Ursoc's spirit in the dream. So with Ardenweald, my problem with it is that it completely breaks the purpose of the Emerald Dream as a realm of peace for the wild gods. And if Ardenweald exists, then what's the purpose of the Emerald Dream now? A sanctuary for elves? A sanctuary for all nature magic? A sanctuary for Elune? And it's also cool that they expand upon the trust of BFA here. Hopefully they get a raid soon. The zone also mentions that the Winter Queen has a sister, which I'm pretty sure is obviously a loon since Armwield has a connection to the Emerald Dream. Revendreth is probably my favorite zone in all of Shadowlands, and probably the best part of Shadowlands because of its whole gothic aesthetic and questline, which is ripped straight out of Hotel Transylvania. Everything about it, from the personality, to the music, to the visuals, to the mounts, all makes me love the zone even more, and it's a much better gothic zone than Gilneas. But the story of this expansion is what really grinds my gears. It's so contrived and awful that it generally feels like a fanfiction. The story goes that after the events of BFA, Sylvanas Windrunner retreats out to the Ice-Crowned Citadel, home of the... Oh my god! It's Bolvar Fordragon! Yes! I've been dying to see him take a big part in WoW since after Wrath! Oh my god! He's gonna kick Sylvanas' ass and then he's gonna... And he's down. Lich King? Yeah. More like the Bitch King. So she breaks the Lich King's crown and shatters the veil between Azeroth and the Shadowlands, the realm of death in the WoW universe where all spirits go to either live a new life or to be thrown into the Maw. It was said before that the dead go to the Twisting Nether, so why not make the Shadowlands in the Twisting Nether? Where do warlocks get all their powerful spells like Hellfire? It's said that the warlocks get their magic from the Twisting Nether. And where do the demons go when they die? It said they go to the Twisting Nether so that they get rehabilitated into the Shadowlands? The Shadowlands is in disarray as Sylvanas plans to use the might of an entity called the Jailer for some nefarious scheme. All while we the player have to unite together the Covenants and take him down. So right away I want to ask, why are all these characters here? If we're facing such a high threat in the Shadowlands, then why did you bring some of Azeroth's famous heroes into the Shadowlands? They're useless and leave us the player to do the dirty work in uniting the Covenants. I know I said before that the player is the Gary Stew, but in modern WoW, the player often exists as a mere plot device to achieve a character's ends and always lets the big boys do the dirty work, especially in the fight scenes. So if Shadowlands is focused so much on us reuniting the Covenants, then why do you have all these characters here anyway? They're useless! Bolvar is useless. Greymane is useless. The Knights of the Ebon Blade are useless. Bane, Jaina, and Thrall are useless beyond being tortured for some reason. Tyrande is useless, and the Rune Carver is useless beyond crafting weapons. The Jailer doesn't even use him to craft Shalamorn, so why is the Rune Carver even there? Unless he's of course the missing Primus, which is kinda obvious because I mean, just look at that face. Aside from him, why don't the other characters help us out in the other zones? Why not assign each of the characters to go with us the player to each of the zones? I would have liked to see some Van Helsing shit if Greymane went with us to Revendreth. Even BFA gave all these characters shit to do. This is just pathetic. Why have them here when they could be restoring Azeroth after the Fourth War? Sylvanas Windrunner's story in this expansion is the worst part of Shadowlands bar none between this and Torghast. So after grinding your way through Torghast, you discover that Sylvanas' goal is to use the Jailer to break the cycle between life and death and give people free will in the afterlife. What? If that's the case, then care to explain everything that happened before? If I remember correctly, before BFA, Sylvanas was trying to free herself from death, or at least attempt to control it and use them against her enemies. Or hell, even lead a new sanctum for the Forsaken. All the things she's done. Her becoming war chief, her attempting to control Aegir, the burning of Teldrassil, the death of Saurfang. All of that was for the Jailer? What the hell is going on? Can anyone sit down and talk to me and tell me how this makes any sense with pre-established events? Sylvanas' whole story, right from BFA, represents an unpleasant malaise that hangs over modern WoW. The story is wholly contrived. The lore is so uninteresting and uninspired and at times does make sense with pre-established lore, and they removed the actiony style of WoW to the point that it reveals just how terrible the writing is, and Sylvanas' whole story is the worst offender. The thing is with Garrosh, his motivation made sense with his character and it tied in organically with all he did in the past. He was a mighty warrior wanting to live up to his heritage and be better than the Horde before him. He didn't even want to be war chief but tried his best to build a prosperous future for the Horde through any means necessary, even if it resorts to drastic measures. He wanted to pick the Horde back up and made it better than it ever was. Dare I say it, he did nothing wrong. With Sylvanas, she's written like some henchman that's been doing dirty work since the events of some short story that existed a while ago, when before she was a renegade trying to rid her from her curse, or hell, at least save the undead from being shunned by their curse. That is a terrible retcon and doesn't make any sense with all she's been doing at Cataclysm, or any expansion at all since she's been doing jack shit. Before I go forward, I should briefly mention the retcons they've been doing. These retcons they've added in recent years don't make sense with previously established lore. I think it's a trend that's been going on since Legion. No expansion is apparent with shitty retcons in Shadowlands. There were other retcons in the past, but since I'm not a major lore nerd, I can't be bothered to list all of them, but I want to go on a brief tangent and talk about some of them in Shadowlands. It's said in Shadowlands that the Scourge take inspiration for their architecture from Maldraxxus, which is actually dumb because it retcons the idea of the Scourge taking inspiration from their allies, the underground Nerubians, indicating that they built their bases of operation alone without taking notice of their allies' help. How would they make their strongholds without knowing other architectures? Or currently there's a theory going around the community that Denathrius made the Dreadlord / Nathrazim, who were originally said to come from the planet Nathriza in the Twisty Nether, the original afterlife before Shadowlands. So does that mean that Sire Denathrius, let alone all members of the Pantheon of Death, can make their own planets? If that's even the case, then why the hell does the Shadowlands even exist? Just why? Just place those zones in the Twisting Nether and call it a day. It's not even hard. Anyway, back to Sylvanas. She did so much shit to the point that it all doesn't make sense with her motivations, nor does it align with the shit she's done in the past. Everything she did in recent years is arbitrary, and that's the best thing I can describe her entire story arc. It's utterly arbitrary. She's written with so much vagueness that the writers generally have no idea what to do with her next, but they have to rushfully think of something to milk her for all she's worth. They clearly want you to be sympathetic for Sylvanas all because she's hot and shit, and I'm not buying it, because Sylvanas is a terrible villain. She's dull, lifeless, her motivation is stupid and doesn't align with her past work, probably because she's done jack shit after Cataclysm, and her whole storyline is so boring and contrived. I actually zoned out watching one of the cutscenes she is in. I fear they're gonna set her up for a redemption arc in the 9.1 raid, judging by a few bits of evidence, but Lord, I hope not, because she's fucking irredeemable after all the crazy shit she's done. To be fair, Garrosh is irredeemable after the crazy shit he's done, but at least he did it because for him, it was the right thing to do and it was honorable. He did it all for the Horde. Arthur slaughtered an entire city, but he did it all to save his kingdom. Sylvanas wanted to control and free herself from death and lead the Forsaken away from the disgust the Horde shone on them, but now she's written as if she was always a henchman, and now they're using Anduin as a weapon to achieve their ends. Why? Why even make him another Lich King? Is it because he's a human and wields the power of the light? That's fucking dumb! What key do you think Anduin is? Just revive Arthas and use him instead. It's not even hard. Actually, no. Don't do that. The Jailer is also not a good villain. He's essentially an elaborate retcon in the form of a character who is said to be behind a lot of major events in Warcraft history. Which is fucking dumb. Why the hell does he even exist? All the events that happened were of their respective originators. The Legion invaded Azeroth because they wanted to Thanos the universe to protect it from the Void, a growing threat. The Legion Dreadlords made the Lich King's crown to control the Scourge and soften up Azeroth for their invasion. Him behind everything is fucking cartoon villain level bad. But what do I know? I don't care about the lore anymore, and the info I'm going off of is from fucking Wowpedia. That is a fucking shitty retcon and mingles with pre-established lore in the worst way possible, by making it look like he was behind almost everything. What's next? Is he behind the destruction of Draenor? Is he the boss of Kill Jaden? Is he like a servant of Sargeras? He, like other characters in this expansion, is doing jack shit but hanging out in his room and letting his underlings do the dirty work. So what the hell is he up to? Why does he even have the Runecarver if he never uses him? Why does he want to break the cycle? To come to Azeroth? Take over the universe? Become a Titan? I'm pretty sure one of these questions is explained when you empower your legendaries, but since Torghast is so grindy, I can't be bothered. There's a good reason I don't care about a story in a video game, and this is the best example of that. This one scene from a Captain Grimm machinima perfectly sums up the story of Shadowlands as a whole.
Every sensible player by now has had it of hearing about Sylvanas every 2 seconds. Everything is about her, everything is according to her master plan.
I fear that Shadowlands won't last long because while the expansion as it currently sits is boring and grindy, judging by the first patch there might not be a lot of content to take in this expansion, and it would make the whole concept of the Shadowlands a complete waste. The whole idea of Shadowlands being made of different afterlives is actually kinda cool, and I would like to see more afterlives beyond the ones we have now. What I would like to see is at least a new zone outside of a Mart area with a new covenant. Like, I would love to see the other side as a full zone outside of a dungeon, because that would mean Rastakon's potential return to the Shadowlands would go to waste. Or hell, a new afterlife concerning another race, like, I don't know, the Tauren, the Goblins, the fucking Tuskar. Just give us something other than this uninspired trash. So now that I've gone over every expansion story and shared my opinions on them, I think it's safe for me to make this statement. Blizzard does not need to try anymore. They stopped trying after Mists of Pandaria, both with gameplay and especially the story. Shadowlands made me realize just how creatively bankrupt Blizzard is at telling a story, now relying on contrivances, half-baked fan service, uninspired and uninteresting lore, and a lot of stories gone unresolved or to waste. Sargeras' Sword and Gilneas are my two favorite examples, yet there are already more I never mentioned. Like, what the hell happened to Trade Prince Gallywix? He was present during the Goblin Heritage campaign, only for him to get locked up in his own suit and replaced by Gazlo once Sylvanas left. So what the hell's he up to? Or how about Nathanos Blightcaller, Sylvanas' loyal simp? He died and got sent to the Maw, yet Sylvanas doesn't care about him moving forward. So what the hell's he doing? Or what about the Goblin from Nazjatar? Are they gonna join the Horde as allies? Who knows? Who cares? Blizzard. They're the ones that don't care since they're so out of touch with their fanbase. If they're so creatively bankrupt, then why don't they do what Riot is doing with League of Legends and make spin-off games outside of Hearthstone that flesh out their characters and world in new ways of play? Like maybe a Darksider style game with trolls and... actually, never mind, I take it all back. Point is that Blizzard doesn't need to try anymore because of the mindless 12-year-olds and dress-up simps that play this game. People will eat up the fan service because of how addicting the game is, and the fact that they can't even make a coherent story, and the fact that they forget old bits of lore exist. I hear the next expansion is going to be about the Light, which is likely given the various hints throughout the Shadowlands. What I would like to see in this Light expansion is the true South Seas expansion that BFA tried to be, with Telebeam, the Dragon Isles, the Darkspear Islands, Plunder Isle, along with some cool inhabitants like a new Goblin Cartel and Tuskar and giant gorillas and fucking light-fused Galakron as the final boss. Or we can go back to alternate draenor and fight you're all on a second continent. Whatever rocks Blizzard's block. I hope I sounded consistent in this video, but like I said, I'm not really a major lore nerd, and all the info I'm going off of is from other sources and not the game itself. Plus, they stopped trying with the lore after Mists, so there is that. No matter how bad the game gets, I'll still find myself coming back to WoW, not just because I have to do dailies and shit, but also to see some of the new bits of lore and see whether or not they're as interesting. Because some of the new bits of lore in modern WoW is pretty interesting, like Revendreth. But the other ones they add in don't really make a lot of sense with pre-established lore. I could quit now with all these complaints. I could cancel my subscription and play a different MMO, but you know what? I just don't care. I don't care about the gameplay because of how low it's gotten over the years, and I especially don't care about the lore anymore. And that's honestly sad. Metzen leaving Blizzard killed the writing of WoW, and WoW's stories continue to be uninteresting and forgettable because the new writers of Blizz don't understand the heart of WoW and what made it special. All for the sake of sucking off a shitty villain with a shitty motivation that makes no sense, and I fear that's how it's gonna be for the coming years. For now, I thank you all for watching this video and making it to the end. Whether you played since Vanilla or Wrath, we can remember WoW writing, or World of Warcraft as a whole, for what it was, not for what it's become.